So let me say two things on the front end. I believe with all my heart in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I believe that it's God's remnant church. And I believe that God has raised it up to do a specific time. I have spent all my life in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. My grandmother joined this church after hearing Edson White on the Morning Star in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Okay, that's about as far back. When I was growing up, Sister Long, I had no non-Adventist relatives on either side of my family. Okay, I refer to myself, Dr. Shelley, as the king of the Adventists. No, and I don't say that boastfully. That's just my family background. All right, so I believe in this church. Grew up Adventist, went to all Adventist schools, then became an Adventist preacher. All right, so, but I gotta putting this, and then let me say one more thing. I also believe in, lest I sound like an angry old black man, I will tell you that when I was here, I hired the first Caucasian pastor, the first Caucasian teacher, the first Korean, the first women. I believe in diversity. In the United States, though, and in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, diversity is a one-way street. Primarily, it consists of people of color going to the majority culture institutions. That's how we get integrations. It does not often work the other way around. All right? So, having said that, and then having that, hopefully that prepares the way for this next thing. And that is, as much as I love the Seventh-day Adventist Church and as much as I love the United States, both of them have an ugly history of racism. They just do. And to pretend otherwise is dishonest. And we've reached a point in this country where we have politicians who don't want us to tell our story because our story makes them uncomfortable, to which I say, if it makes you uncomfortable to hear it, how uncomfortable do you think it was for my ancestors to live it? Okay? Don't ask me to give up my history, because part of my history includes ugly parts of your history. All right? All right. So we cannot honestly tell our story without addressing the parts of our story that are not pleasant, and hopefully it will make people say, okay, we never want to do that again. All right? All right. So we have never in regional conferences turned people away. Almost everybody my age or above has a story of how they went to a church of the majority culture and they either were turned away or they were told the black church is across town. All right? That's a part of it. Regional conferences have never done that. All right? Regional conferences have always taken anybody who came in the door. All right? But in the Adventist church, there are two kinds of conferences. There's regional conferences, and those are all the churches in a region. Like South Central, all the churches in Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, and Northwest Florida. That's a regional conference. The other kinds of conferences are state conferences. State conferences are all the churches primarily in a state. So Georgia, Cumberland, for example, are the churches in East Tennessee and Georgia. Kentucky, Tennessee, state conferences. Gulf states used to be called Alabama, Mississippi, state conferences. All the churches in a state. Regional conferences, all the churches in a region. State conferences, all the churches in a state. All right. Now here's the question that people ask. Why do we need two separate organizations? Okay? We all know that in Chattanooga, there are South Central churches, and there are Georgia Cumberland churches. In Nashville, where I live, when I worked for South Central Conference, the Kentucky 10 Conference office was about 10 miles away. All right? There is one church, if I remember right, in South Central, where not only is there a state conference church and a regional conference church in the same city, there's a regional conference church and the state conference church on the same street. Okay? So why is that? Okay, and then people say, oh, it is a bad witness, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reality is most churches of any denomination are segregated. Okay? And to the extent they are integrated, they are almost always integrated by black people integrating white churches. It very rarely happens the other way around. Okay? So the same rocks people throw at the Adventist church can be thrown at virtually any other church. All right. Now, would it be better if, this is what people say, they say, oh, Elder Edmond, there's not going to be black. I remember I was in Florida, and I checked into my hotel, and the lady who checked me was Adventist. And she said, and she saw, I guess she looked at my credit card, and she saw that I was Adventist. She said, oh, and she was black, and she said, I don't believe in black conferences and white conferences. She went to the state conference church. So what she really meant was, I don't believe in what you have. All right? But this is what people say. Elder Edmond, there are not going to be black conferences and white conferences in heaven. True. There are not going to be any conferences. There's not going to be the general conference. But nobody is saying, let's get rid of the general conference. When you don't know your history, you accept the narrative that says what we have is an aberration and what they have is the norm. Let me give you an example. When I was in South Central, I was on the board of Southern Adventist University and the board of Oakwood. All right? Shortly after I took this job, Oakwood called me and they said, Elder Edmond, we need you to come and talk to our students about regional conferences. Why do we need them? I said, sure, I'll be glad to. So I came and I said, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to come back to my school, talk about regional conferences. But I need to tell you something. I was on the board of trustees for 7 years at Southern. There was never a time when they said, let's tell our students why we need state conferences. We never had that discussion. We are the only people who have to justify our existence. All right? Now, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that today. I'm going to tell you why we need region. In a perfect world, would we need region? No, we wouldn't. But we don't live in a perfect world. All right? So the question is, what is the best thing to advance the kingdom of God among people of color? That's really the question. All right? So the question is, why do we need two separate conferences? And then the question is, this is what people say. They say, oh, Elder Edmond. And a lot of these people are people who are black. I did this presentation in a black church, and one of the elders argued me down. I thought he was going to follow me to the airport. We don't need it. We don't know. It's a relic of segregation. Well, if regional conferences are a relic of segregation, why wouldn't that make state conferences a relic of segregation? All right? All right. So why do we need two separate organizations, and are not regional conferences a unnecessary duplication? And again, it's the narrative. If regional conferences are a duplication, then wouldn't state conferences be a duplication as well? All right. So let's add, but I need 6 of you to help me explain whether regional conferences are a duplication of unnecessary duplication. So I need 6 volunteers. That means I need 6 of y'all to get up. 6 of y'all to get up. There's 1. Thank you, Brother Hastings. 2. Okay, I need 3 more. I need 3 more. Thank you, Sister Copeland. I saw you take your coat off. I was hoping that meant you were coming this way. Okay, I need 2 more. I need 2 more. Y'all do understand. 4 is not quite 6. All right. All right, thank you. And I need 1 more. I need 1 more. Okay, well, she's with you. Okay, that's okay. We'll bring, who are all these children? They're all yours? They're yours? Oh, okay. All right, thank you. Okay, now, Sister Copeland, I'm gonna borrow you, yes. Sister Copeland has taken me over her house many times, and we've had good fellowship. So you, okay, so I'm gonna separate you from the rest of the group. Okay, now, the first regional conference was Lake Region, all right? Okay, all right, all right. Lake Region covers the states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, all right? That's the area that Lake Region covers, right? Okay. Inside of Lake Region, there are 5 state conferences. All right, so you get to be the Illinois conference, you're Indiana, you're Michigan, you're Wisconsin, and you're Minnesota. All right? Now, she covers by herself the same territory that all 5 of y'all cover. Now, okay, she has a conference office, right? It's in suburban Chicago, all right? But guess what? He has a conference office, he has a conference office, he has a conference office, she has a conference office, she has a conference office, right? Inside that conference office, there's a conference president, right? But guess what? He has a conference president, she has one, he has one, she has one, she has one. In that conference office, there are departmental directors, like what I used to be, youth director, right? Okay, so she has a youth director, he has a youth director, she has a youth director, he has a youth director, she has a youth director, They have a campground. It's in Michigan. But guess what? He has a campground, she has a campground, he has a campground, she has a campground, she has a campground. Okay, so which do you think costs more money to operate? Lake Region or all 5 of them? All 5 of them, right? She literally costs hundreds of millions of dollars less to operate than she does. All right? Now, all of them look at her and say, you are duplicating services. But who's really duplicating services? The one of them or the 5 of them? Okay? Even though they have almost twice as much money as she does, she's growing 4 times faster, all right? Which means, as I said this morning, she does more with less. Okay, but what they're saying is, they're telling her, you close down and come with us, even though we cost more money and we're less productive. When you don't know your own story, somebody else tells your story from your perspective. We hear all the time, I don't believe in separate. What you really mean is you don't believe in this conference. Okay. So, see, when you don't know your own history, you you accept the narrative. This is what they're saying. They're saying, let's all come together. But when they say let's all come together, they don't mean they come in here. They mean they want you to shut down and come there. All right. Okay? That's why it's important to know your history. Because who really wants to argue about coming together? Who wants to say, no, I don't want to come together? Okay? Nobody. That's an unbeatable argument until you understand what they mean when they say let's come together. Okay? The reality is if our brethren really wanted to all come together, they could close down anytime they want to. Okay? They could close down anytime they want to and merge. But there has never been a proposal for them to merge with her. Now, there's been some proposals. There was a proposal in Northeastern, in Atlantic Union. Northeastern, that's the New York area. Northeastern is way bigger of all the unions of all the conferences in Atlantic Union. Northeastern is way bigger than any of the state conferences. But you know what the union proposed 40 years ago? For Northeastern to be broken up amongst the smaller, which is the equivalent of a large company in the United States splitting up and joining a small company. That's never going to happen. But that was a serious proposal because the reality is never going to be that they're going to join here. Here's the inconvenient truth. Here's the inconvenient truth. The greatest building program in the world doesn't require you to raise money, doesn't require you to borrow money, it doesn't require a campaign. You know what the greatest building program in the world, you know what's going to get you a church faster than anything else? All of y'all to join a majority culture church. If all of y'all come, guess what's going to happen? Let's just be real. What's going to happen to that church? No, it's not going to close up. It's going to become a black church. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, thank you very much. Let's affirm our. All right. Now, look at this fact. There are 9 regional conferences. In the territory of the 9 regional conferences, there are 30 state conferences. 30. Do you know how much more it costs to operate 30 than 9? Okay, when I was in South Central, it cost us about $20 million a year to operate. All right? So let's say you do the math, 30 times 20 million. That's a whole lot more. Well, actually, there would be, if all the state conferences or regional conferences, there would be 9 instead of 30. So that's 21 more conferences times $20 million. That's almost $500 million more to operate, all right? And that's assuming that it only costs $20 million to operate. Some of those conferences are up into 50. Georgia Cumberland is probably a $60 million business, all right? Okay, all right. Okay, now, let's talk about some pivotal figures in the history of regional conference work. Here you have a fellow by the name of Charles M. Kinney. Charles M. Kinney was the first African-American pastor to be ordained. Okay, ordained, that's an Adventist term. What's not Adventist? It's a Bible term. Ordained means the church recognizing your call to ministry. It's an official recognition of your call, all right? So, Charles Kinney had 2 unique experiences. The first one was he started off in the Midwest, ended up in St. Louis, all right? He was a faithful worker. The Lord blessed his efforts. And this is in the 1890s, okay? And he won a number of people to the truth. Wonderful, right? Joy in heaven. No joy in St. Louis, okay? Because he's bringing these black people in the 1890s to a primarily Caucasian church. Joy in heaven, no joy in St. Louis. Then when he got ordained in Nashville, again, 1890s. He brings his family in, and it's like, y'all can't sit here, okay? Again, it's the South. Y'all can't. So he was the first one who said, we're not leaving the church, but maybe it's better if we have our own institutions, okay? He was one of the first ones to say that, all right? Okay, am I not doing something right? Where are my AV people? Oh, there you go. Okay, Claude Barnett, second pivotal figure in Adventist history. Okay, but Claude Barnett is a pivotal figure in Adventist history without actually being an Adventist, all right? So I see you look puzzled. You want to say, Elder Edmond, well, how can he be a pivotal figure without being an Adventist? I'm glad you asked that question, all right? Claude Barnett was a newspaper columnist, reporter, all right, back in the 30s and 40s. But here's what we know about newspaper reporters in the 30s and 40s. They were not writing for the Atlanta Constitution or the New York Times or the Washington Post, or they weren't doing that. So back in the day, we used to have black newspapers, right? Okay, and so he was one of the leading black newspaper reporters. He happened to have an Adventist friend. His name was Owen Troy Sr. His son is still alive. And Owen Troy kind of surreptitiously told him about how difficult it was to be a black Seventh-day Adventist in a church that was as thoroughly segregated as the rest of society. Unfortunately, the Adventist church, instead of leading society, followed society. So, for example, if it was lunchtime and you wanted to eat and you were at the general conference cafeteria, the headquarters of the remnant church, but if you were there and you were black, you could not eat in the general conference cafeteria, right? There were schools up until, I imagine, the 70s that if you were black, I'm talking about Adventist schools. They're Adventist schools you couldn't get into, all right? I'm not so sure if Southern, by the way, wasn't one of them. No shade. I think it's a fine school. Would have sent my kids there if it wasn't at Oakwood. But let's be honest. So there were some schools that you couldn't get into. Okay, Andrews, which is where I went for my postgraduate work. Okay, Andrews, which was called Emmanuel Missionary College back in those days. You could eat in the cafeteria, Sister Rita, but you would have to sit at the colored table. Okay, so Owen Troy told Claude Barnett, and he wrote about that and embarrassed the church. All right? But now, here's the straw that broke the camel's back. Lucy Byard. Okay, this is what we think she looked like. She was actually lighter than this. But, you know, this is actually a picture of a picture that cost a whole lot of money. Which is why I have Hastings, the picture of the picture, instead of the picture. All right? I happened to be there when they unveiled the real picture. All right? So Lucy Byard was from the Caribbean, and she had a form of cancer. This is 1943. okay? She had a form of cancer. She wanted to be treated in an Adventist hospital because Adventist healthcare is a big business in the Adventist church. I tell people all the time that if you ever get a chance to work for the healthcare system, you need to take it because they are not on the denominational pay scale, all right? So all the rest of us are on the denominational pay scale. They are not. So I tell people, if you ever get a chance, in fact, if they call me right now, this meeting is over, I'm going to go work for them, all right? They are not on the denominational pay scale, all right? I mean, the people who are in administration, they make way more money. I mean, I'm not just a little bit more. I mean, I used to sit on their board, and we had to do what's called a salary audit. And when they rolled out those figures, I said, y'all know he makes what 20 of us make. I'm serious. No, that wasn't an exaggeration. It really was. So now you understand why I will be raptured away if they call me right now. I'm out of here. All right. So, but Lucy Byard wanted to be treated. She lived in New York. Wanted to be treated in our hospital, which was then called Washington Sanitarium. Maybe she knew, maybe she didn't, that by Adventist policy and by the law of the state of Maryland, black people could not be treated in white hospitals in Maryland. Now, that wasn't just a state law, it was a policy in our church, all right? So she writes for admission, so they don't see her, all right? Then when she gets there, she's light enough to pass. Y'all remember when folk could pass? Okay, she passed until either her husband showed up or they looked at her application, whereupon she failed. They kicked her out. This dying woman was kicked out of an Adventist hospital because she was black. Sent across town to the black hospital, which is called, in those days, Freedmen's Hospital, which today is Howard University Hospital, which today is an Adventist hospital. All right? Okay? And that caused such an uproar because it happened in one of the relatively few places in those days where you had a lot of highly educated professional black people in that church. Eva B. Dykes, for those of you who went to Oakwood, even if you didn't, some of you have heard of Eva B. Dykes. Eva B. Dykes was the first black woman, not first black Adventist, first black woman, period, to finish the requirements for a PhD. She went to that church. The second woman to finish went to that church, okay? I don't know if you were old. Yeah, I don't want to take you down this. I want to take you down with me. Sister Bandy and I grew up in the same, I'm older than she is. We grew up in the same city. Helen Suglin was a member of that church, okay? And they said, listen, enough of discrimination in housing, in administration. And at that point, even though the Seventh-day Adventist Church had been around almost 100 years, there had never been a black administrator on the General Conference level. Never. All right? So they said, listen, enough. They formed a committee, which is what Adventists do. And as a result of their work, in April of 1944, the General Conference. So you think the General Conference only meets every 5 years. The executive committee of the General Conference meets twice a year. At the spring council, it's called the spring council and the fall council. At their spring meeting, the General Conference voted to allow what was called colored conferences. Y'all remember when we were colored? Okay. And part of the action said these colored conferences should be administered by colored pastors and colored laymen. Let me tell you why that was important. Up until that time, black people were not allowed to run much of anything. The General Conference, because there were no regional conferences, the black work was run by the General Conference through what they called the Negro Department. So we went from colored to Negroes. All right? And they were in charge of the black work, but the General Conference decided to appoint someone, and guess what their ethnicity was? The first 3 directors of the Negro department were not Negroes. They were Caucasian. Even in Africa, up until the 70s, the work in Africa was led by white Americans and Europeans. Okay? Because black people were not. Even at Oakwood, the first few presidents of Oakwood were Caucasian. All right? It was important that the action said to be administered by colored pastors and colored laymen. The other thing that's important about that action is that was a general conference vote. Okay? Black people didn't get mad and say, we out of here. The general conference voted that. In those days, the general conference leadership was almost entirely Caucasian. Why is that important? Faced with a choice between integration and regional conferences, the church chose regional conferences, all right? Which makes this let's all come together thing, it puts it in a different light. Because what our brothers are really saying, and they don't know it. I have done this same presentation in Caucasian churches. Done the same presentation, all right? And they didn't know. You know, everybody who's not like us is not bad, okay? There's some wonderful people who are not African American who helped us have what we have, all right? But we live in a country where the narrative is controlled by Caucasians, okay? And so think about what's being said. When they say let's all come together, what they're really saying, and they don't even know it, is we were not ready for integration. That's the reason why we had regional conference. Now we are, and what we want you to do is close down the institutions that we made you start when we weren't ready for integration. Right? And when you don't know your own history, then you say, oh, hallelujah, amen. But listen, you cannot integrate with people who don't want to integrate with you. If I can't be a guest in your house if when I come, you leave. The history of the United States and the history of our church is that every time enough black people come to a Caucasian entity, that entity becomes black. Every time. All right? I'll give you a couple of examples. The Greater New York Conference consists of the city of New York primarily. New York is so large that it's not a state conference, it's a city conference. All right? Okay? Once upon a time, the Greater New York Conference was primarily Caucasian. That's where Ted Wilson got started. Okay? So that means it's pretty white. Okay? All right? Today, I don't think you can find a single Caucasian church. Okay? Now, again, think about this for a minute. We're talking about New York. We're not talking about some little small town in Mississippi. We're talking about the largest city by far in this country. So the question, Elder Chaplain Edwards, is where did all the Caucasian Adventists go? There can only be, Sister Carrington, one of three explanations. Either they all died. Okay. Or, number two, they all disappeared in the Hudson River. Like Atlantis. They just disappeared. Okay. Or faced with the choice between going to a church that is no longer majority Caucasian or not going to church at all. They've chosen not to go to church at all. Okay? That's the only three. A whole conference disappeared. Okay? For one reason. Y'all showed up. Okay? Now, again, there is nothing inherently evil about people of different cultures choosing to worship together. That's why we have Spanish churches, Japanese churches. And see, this would almost be funny if it wasn't so serious. Nobody says to the Latino, let's all come together. Nobody says that. Our Spanish church, our Spanish-speaking brethren don't have to justify why they have what they have. We are the only ones. And because we don't know our history, some of the loudest voices are black people. Okay. All right. Let us go on. Okay. Here are some figures. Some iconic figures that we all know. The Cleveland, of course, is from here. Was from here. And the point I want to make is these titanic figures. 3 of the 4 of them got their start in regional conferences. And when you consider the fact that they got hired in the 50s, the 40s and the 50s, the reality is it's very possible none of these men would have ever seen the light of day if it weren't for regional conferences. Okay, why are you not? Oh, that's because I keep hitting the wrong button. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, why is, help me out, AV people. Okay, there you go. Okay, here's some regional conference entities. The Regional Conference Retirement Plan, Message Magazine, Breath of Life, the Regional Voice. The Regional Voice is the same thing as the Southern Tidings. How many of you get the Southern Tidings? All right, the Regional Voice comes out once a quarter, but it comes online, okay? Because it is enormously expensive. Now, the only reason why it's not enormously expensive for you to get it is because your conference subsidizes it. They pay for it. We have to pay for the Regional Voice to go out. Very expensive, all right? It's online, and you can get it at Adventist Regional Ministries, Regional Ministries, all right? And it comes out once a quarter, all right? The office for, Okay, now let's close with 7 reasons why we need regional conferences, all right? Here's reason number 1. Okay, regional conferences allow us to control our own resources. I talked to you about that this morning. I talked to you about, I gave you one example, and that is we were able to build a $9 million building. That's not what it, that's not an estimated cost. That's what it costs. It costs us $9 million to build that building. And the reason why we were able to build it and open it without owing anybody is because regional conferences control. We were able to appropriate from ourselves the money to build the building. If we had to borrow that money, it would have cost us between $20 to $25 million over a 20 to 30 year period to borrow that money. So that means instead of that money going to a bank, it goes into some area of ministry. Because regional conferences control your own resources. Now, if we didn't control our own resources, first of all, we would have had to get permission. We didn't have to ask for our own building. The other thing is, in areas like the West Coast that don't have their own regional conferences, they are given monies by their own conference. They're, in essence, given an allowance. But when you don't control your own resources, you don't control your own direction. Okay? You don't control your own ministry. Okay? Because in regional conferences in South Central does what you give them money to do. Right? If there wasn't a regional conference, South Central, which wouldn't exist, but the black work would only be able to do what somebody else gave them the money to do. Okay? So, not only would we not have, this thing is no longer doing, move back? Okay. I did move back, and, okay. I need y'all to rescue me. Okay. Oh, okay. Did y'all do that or did? Okay, so now, all right. Okay. We would not have the building. There's the building here. That's the building here. There would be no Charles E. Dudley. We named it after Elder Dudley. There would be no Elder Dudley building or no regional conference retirement. All right? Now, the next time people say black people do not, and this is the thing that we say, oh, we don't know how to run stuff. All right? The North American Division had a retirement program. They ended up $1 billion, not million, $1 billion in the hole. $1 billion. Let me say that one more time. $1 billion. All right? That notwithstanding the fact that the people who, and they still have people on it, the people on it get somewhere around $1,200 a month. You work 40 years and you get $1,200 a month. Okay, now I know some of you are really great at with money, but most of us can't do that. All right? All right. The regional conference retirement plan operates at a level that when my time, which is coming up very soon, when my time comes to retire, because South Central is the only conference that has a supplemental retirement plan, when I leave, between the regional conference retirement plan, South Central's plan, and Social Security, I will make more in salary than I'm making now. Okay? All right? But that's because regional conferences control their own resources. All right, next slide, please. I'm not fooling with it anymore. Let y'all do it. Okay. Regional conference, and really this should be the number one reason. Regional conferences are the best way to reach people of color with the gospel. They are. Now, is our responsibility only to people of No, but that's our first responsibility, because if we don't do that, who's going to do that? Okay, and so when people say, oh, that's a relic of segregation, think about this for a minute. And this is actually a real example. One of the things that regional conferences are doing is we are assisting the Inter-American Division at their request with the largest evangelistic effort that may be in the history of this church. They're doing 500,000 Bible studies, and they want some of us to come over and do the follow-up for those 500,000. So there are a number of people. I'm one of them that's going to go. I'm going, at least that's what they told me, I'm supposed to go to Honduras. Okay? The problem with Honduras, I don't speak Spanish, which means everything I do is going to have to be translated. Now, I believe the Lord is going to bless anyway, but wouldn't it be better to have somebody from Honduras who speaks Spanish to be able to minister to people who speak Spanish? That's the same thing with regional conferences. Isn't it better to have somebody who has the same cultural experience, same cultural background, to reach people of that same background? We're the only people, though, where other people think that's a bad idea. Okay. And again, it's because when you don't know your own history, somebody else tells your story from their perspective. All right, next slide. Regional conferences give people of color a seat at the denominational decision-making table. When decisions about you are being made, you need to be in the room, okay? You are either, somebody said one time, you either have a seat at the table or you're an item on the menu, okay? There are times when there are decisions made that affect you, and you need to be in the room. Now, in the Adventist church, representation on those kinds of entities are decided by two things: your membership and the denominational entity. So when I was president of South Central, I was automatically a delegate for General Conference because South Central is an entity. If it wasn't for South Central, we would be in the room on the union waving our hands saying, hey, y'all, will you please remember that remember to include us. We don't have to ask to be included because we have our own entity. We are automatically included. All right. Next slide, number 4. Regional conferences are a better economic model. We just showed you that. When we said, hey, there's five state conferences as opposed to one. If I'm running a business, I would much rather pay the expenses of one thing than to pay. I don't want to pay 5 presidents, okay? I only want to pay one, all right? So regional conferences are a better economic model. All right. Now, I meant to say, in terms of reaching people with gentrification, we have white people moving into the inner cities. We have a responsibility to reach the people in our neighborhood, which means we're going to have an entirely different discussion. And that is, how do we reach the people who move back into our neighborhoods? And because not only are they not black, but unlike a lot of our brethren in the inner city, they also are not poor, okay? Because what they, in essence, have done is taken over and properties that aren't very expensive, and they've built them up. And so in Capitol Hill, which is one of our larger in terms of tithe, Capitol Hill in Washington, we're talking about homes that are up to $2 million. Well, if I have people in my neighborhood that have $2 million homes, the food bank and the clothing giveaway, that's not going to work. They own food stores. So they don't need a food bank. All right? So we have to have an entirely different conversation that we haven't had yet. But we need to have it because somebody's got to reach those people, and in all likelihood, it's not going to be state conference people. It's going to be us. All right? Reason number 5, why we need regional conferences. They're one of the greatest success stories since 1944. They've grown 4 times faster. And think about this. When you're faithful, which I assume everybody in here is, when you're faithful and return your tithe, not all your tithe stays in South Central. About 25% of your tithe leaves South Central and goes to fund the work around the world. All y'all who say, "Oh, I don't want to send all of that money out up." Well, the reality is the Adventist Church has been given a mission, not by Elder Jones or Ted Wilson or Dr. Smith. That mission comes from God, which says, go into all the world. You cannot go into all the world without an organization. Right? You can't do it, okay? But that organization requires funding, which requires faithfulness, okay? All right? And our people, meaning Seventh-day Adventists of all races, kindreds, tongues, have funded our church at a level that where there's no church, no other denomination that would trade places with us. Because the Seventh-day Adventist church reaches we have hospitals, churches, schools in approximately 90% of the countries in the world. So the organization, no matter how frustrated those of us who work for it get and how frustrated you get with it, has largely done what it's supposed to do, and that is to take the gospel around the world. We could not do that if all y'all said, and some of you all, of course I know nobody here does this, but some of y'all just say, oh, I'm putting all my money in offering because I want my money. First of all, it's not your money, okay? But you know, I want to see what no. Part of our job is to take the gospel around the world, which you can't do from here. Even if you baptize everybody in Chattanooga, every last person, it doesn't get us out of here. The gospel has to go to all the world. That's the job of the church, which requires an organization. Is the organization perfect? No. But you know why the organization isn't perfect? Because it's run by people. It's never going to be perfect. Jesus had Judas in his organization. Okay? As long as you have people. Okay? And that is one of the marks that we're God's people, when despite all of our flaws, we can still get along. All right? All right. Reason number 6. Black churches are often the only Seventh-day Adventist church inside the city limits. Right? Now, most people live in the city, but our Caucasian brethren have largely abandoned the cities. Right? So if there weren't regional conferences, there would not be very much work going on in our cities. All right? Here's reason number 7. Racism is not dead, nor is it likely to die. I still remember the night Barack Obama got elected president. I'm old enough to remember when there were no black people leading anything except in the church. There were no black mayors, no black governors, no black senators. In sports, there were no black quarterbacks, no black coaches. If it was something to be led, we couldn't lead it. Okay? So I remember when Barack Obama got elected, and I allowed myself for a moment to think that things were going to change. Okay? But they didn't. Racism is something we're going to live with until Jesus comes. Okay? So then the question is, what's the best way to work around racism and finish the work? Okay? All you young people who talk about Wakanda, okay, but regional conferences are the closest things we have to Wakanda. It is. It's the closest thing we got. Okay? It's FUBU. It is. All right? And the Lord has blessed, despite all our disadvantages. Because here's another disadvantage that we don't often think about. Okay? Remember I told you about that 25% that you don't keep? It's the same 25% no matter how much money you have. So let's look down the road at South Atlantic. Okay? The same territory that South Atlantic covers, Georgia, Cumberland, and the Carolina covers. Okay? South Atlantic's tithe is 30,000. The state conferences in that same territory, 30 million. Okay? The same territory, the tithe for the two state conferences is 100 million. 100 million. All right? So that means when they give their 25%, they got 75 million left. We got 30 million and we haven't written our first check. Okay? So, people, we are very quick to talk about us. The fact is, our Caucasian brethren are not better at running stuff They just have more money. You give Elder Jones and Miss Creighton $100 million. See what they do with it. Okay? So the hardest people to convince about what's best for us is us. Okay. All right. Real quickly. Three great myths about regional conference. Here's myth number one. They're a relic of segregation. No, we didn't cause regional conferences didn't cause segregation. They are a product of segregation. All right. Number two. This is another one. Let's all come together. Okay. 2 weeks ago, I was in Phoenix, Arizona. I was preaching in a church, one of the larger black churches in Phoenix, Arizona. There are no regional conferences in Arizona. That church, your church today was more integrated than that church. Okay? That church was just as black as most of our churches are. Where there are no regional conferences, there still isn't any integration. They just don't have a structure. So they don't have integration and they don't have a structure. All right? I've had the privilege of preaching in about 20 or so churches on the West Coast. Okay? Of all those churches, one was integrated. One. The other 19 were every bit as segregated as the churches in South Central. Do you know the reason why we have segregated conferences? Because we have segregated churches. If South Central went away tomorrow, there's not going to be suddenly an influx of people from Georgia, Cumberland coming to your church. What doing away with regional conferences would be doing away from our ability to control our own ministry. That's the only difference between California and South Central. One of us controls our own resources. One of us has the ability to direct our own ministry. Okay? Neither of us has integration. I got a call about 25 years ago to go pastor a church in California. And so when in California, they have what people tried to have when I was here, and that is they want the church to choose the pastor. That's what y'all, let's have the church choose the pastor. We know our church better than you do. You do. I know the workers better than you. Most of y'all, out of the 90 or 100 pastors in South Central, most of y'all outside of Chattanooga probably know 5. So how in the world am I going to turn over the assignment of pastors from the people who know the workers to the people who don't? They're not your employees. They're South Central's employees. So why? You don't get to choose somebody. That's like you saying, I want to choose the general manager of Walmart. You don't work, they don't work, you don't have any, they don't work for you. So you don't get to make that choice. But in California, they have ceded that responsibility to the churches. So the church decided that they wanted Mrs. Edmond and I to come and pastor them. And so they had the whole, we met. They had a search committee. When I was in South Central, we had a church. They said, we want to set up a search committee. I said, we don't do that here. Don't you know they did it anyway? They had a search committee. They sent me 3 names. As soon as I saw it, I deleted. Y'all ain't making, y'all are not deciding this. I don't even know who they said. Delete, boop, gone. Okay. But in California, they tell the conference who they want. Okay, and so so I said, okay, if that's how y'all want to do it, Mrs. Edmond and I will meet, because they said, no, Elder, and we want you. I said, no, since this is how you all do it, Mrs. Edmond and I will meet with your search committee. So we did. And this is what I told him. This is what I told him. This doesn't have anything to do with the presentation. But I said, y'all's reputation is you run the church and you just want the pastor to preach. I said, I don't do that. I said, so if that's what you want, you got the wrong person. He said, no. That's what they wanted. It got proven with the person who did go instead of me. But they said, this is what they said. They said, Elder Edmond, if you come out here, are you going to talk about separation? That's what they call black conferences. I said, no, I believe in self-determination. If you all don't want regional conference, you don't have to have them. But in their minds, regional conferences represented separation. They had separation. It wasn't nobody in that church but black people. Okay? They had it. They just didn't have the structure that allowed them to make decisions for themselves. All right. So we wouldn't all come to, in areas where there are no regional conferences, their churches are every bit as segregated as ours are. Okay. Myth number 3, that integration in the United States and in the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not a one-way street. It is. It's true of neighborhoods. It's true of churches. It's true of conferences. All right, let's continue. We're wrapping up. Okay, here's what we have to remember. Black people are in a search. Black people seek diversity, but diversity does not seek us. It just doesn't. And see, here's the other thing. We have defined diversity as the presence of the majority culture. So if you don't have people of the more majority culture, not diverse. That's why people say Oakwood is not diverse. Okay? So I have parents who say, I don't want to send my child to Oakwood because I want diversity. Ask yourself this question. How many Caucasian parents say, I'm sending my child to Oakwood because I want diversity? Okay? Diversity means that. It means a bunch of people of different cultures. How many of you, either you or your parents, are not originally from the United States? How many of you? Let me see your hands. Okay, I mean, keep them up. Let me see your hands. Okay, you know what? We have diversity. But most people would look at this group and say it's not very diverse because we define diversity as the presence of the majority culture. Okay? Again, that's because the narrative is controlled. All right? Next, final, I think, is that my last slide? Okay. Here's the greatest threat to regional conferences. It's not knowing and not telling our own story. All right? I remember when I was when I first got into administration, I would listen to the older people in administration who are now my age, the age I am now. But I was, when you're young, you think everybody's old. So I would say, listen to the old guys. And they would bang on the table and say, the threat to us are the fact that our Caucasian brethren want to close down regional conferences. Okay, well, and so I listened to them and I was saying, okay, we're not going to let that happen. Fight, Well, here's what I learned. They may have been right, but here's what I learned. Learned 2 things. One, South Central in particular is set up so that nobody can close you down but you. Constitutionally. The General Conference can get mad at y'all. Most conferences have in their constitution the ability for the General Conference to call a constituency meeting about you without your permission. And you got to pay for it. Most conferences are set up. They're based on the model constitution. Okay? When Elder McCoy and I were in South Central, we said we will not allow that to be put in our Constitution, okay? And you know, we got some pushback on it, but it was like, no, y'all not coming in here telling us that when we need to have a constituency meeting, we'll call it, okay? But most conferences are set up, they're based off the general conference model, and the general conference has in essence said, what y'all need to do is give us the ability to come in. And on some level, that makes sense. If the conference, if the whole conference decided to go crazy, as has happened once in our history, then they want the ability to come in there and say, no, y'all are crazy. I'm talking about doctrinally crazy. Y'all have gone off the deep end. We're replacing your lead. What we've said is if we go off the deep end, our people will fix that. Y'all not coming in from the outside and fixing that. All right? But when I was a young administrator, they used to say that's the greatest threat. They want to shut us down. They want our money and blah, blah, blah. Because even though our growth rate has slowed down, the growth rate among state conference is way down if you take out people of color, okay? What's propping up most state conferences are two things. One is the migration of people of color into their conferences. Now, that's fool's gold. Because what happens, and it's funny, what was funny is watching them deal with that. We were sitting in a meeting with them, and what they really wanted to say, there was a bunch of us conference presidents in a meeting, and what they really wanted to say was, it's hard for us to grow our work because when we start something, you all come. Now, that's what they wanted to say, but they were afraid to. But it's true. It's true. They cannot grow their work as long as we continue to show up in their churches. Can't do it, okay? But they're propped up by the migration of people of color into their conferences. And they're propped up, number two, by the fact that they control most of the Adventist institutions. Okay? Southern, for example, you take Southern, and the other huge advantage they have is Little Debbie. Okay? When I was in South Central, Little Debbie, what's his name? I forget his name. I should remember his name. Yes, yeah, Brother McKee, fine person. He gave us $100,000 a year. Now, if he's giving us, what is he doing for them? Okay? We don't have anybody. I know you're looking prosperous, Dr. Shelley, but I don't know. I don't think you and Brother Hastings can give us $100,000. All right? Okay. So they have the institutions, okay? And the reason why you don't recognize what a big blessing having an institution is, South Central is the only conference that has an institution, Oakwood. You take Oakwood out of South Central, and we in a heap of trouble. Let me put you another way. There are about 1,250 regional conference churches. You know who the two largest in tithe are? Oakwood and First Church. Okay? Oakwood by itself does more tithe than about 4 conferences. By itself. Okay? Oakwood and First Church by themselves do almost as much tithe as my home conference of Allegheny West. Those two churches do almost as much tithe as that. So having Oakwood is a huge benefit. I mean, there's probably altogether, I'm not there anymore, there's probably $7 or $8 million coming out of the Huntsville area. Okay? That's a small conference by itself. All right? That's the only Pine Forge is our other entity, but their payroll is a lot smaller. There are 300 workers at Oakwood. That's a huge payroll, okay? That's the only, yeah, that's the only. So one of the reasons why Georgia Come is so big is because of Southern and Little Debbie. Okay? Georgia Come is one of the biggest conferences in tithe in the North American division. All right? So the getting back to what I was saying, the greatest threat is not Caucasians shutting us down. It's the apathy and indifference and the lack of knowledge of our own people. Okay? And here's where I close. Regional conferences are not just a blessing to black people, but regional conferences are a blessing to this church. There are 14 world divisions, okay? In the, you know what a division is? Like the North American division. That's all the churches in North America, right? If regional conferences were a division, we would be the fourth largest division in the church in terms of tithe. Okay? We're 2% of the world church membership, but we're almost 10% of the world's tithe. Okay? So regional conferences have been a blessing not just to us, they're a blessing to the world. Right? And so it is incumbent on us to make sure this entity that God has given to us, that God has blessed us, stays with us until the Lord comes. All right. Thank you.